Mr. Chancellor, Mr. President, Madam Chair of the Governing Council, the Dean who had so many kind words, distinguished guests, soon-to-be MDs and future healthcare leaders, and their proud but deeply indebted parents. I'm touched and I'm humbled to receive an honorary degree from the University of Toronto, especially that I'm certainly not smart enough to get accepted here. I want to thank you for letting me share this special moment with you, and I'll be very brief because I know what you really want is to get up here and get your degree and get to work, and I want that too. As you heard, I'm not a doctor. I'm a lowly journalist. I tell stories. That's what I've done for a long time. And in my work, I meet many people, from those with acute illnesses like AIDS, through to people who live with rare and even fatal conditions, as well as their caregivers and their care providers. I have the privilege of listening to and learning from their fears and frustrations, their hopes and dreams, their wisdom and their rage, their intimacies. They're often inspiring. And I was trying to think today, who could I speak about? What patient that I've met over the years could I speak about who's the most inspiring? And there was one. It was my mum. So I want to talk to you about her today. Today is her birthday. She would have been 87 if she was still alive, but she passed away a few years ago from COPD. A cruel lung disease that slowly robs you of breath and makes you feel like you're drowning on dry land. Now, my mum wasn't educated like you. She didn't even finish high school. But she taught me more about medicine and health policy than any so-called expert ever did. And the reason she did that is she taught me what really matters to patients. And that's the message I want to leave you with today. My mum was one of those little old ladies you see at the mall, dragging her oxygen tank behind her. As she aged, she had an alphabet soup of conditions, like many of us will. Arthritis, osteoporosis, a bout of breast cancer, COPD, of course, and that led to heart problems, to mini strokes, to dementia. Now try to remember behind every one of those diagnoses, there's a complex story. My mother was a child of the Depression. Going hungry in her childhood had lifelong health impacts. She was also a smoker. COPD is a disease of smokers. And of course, that leads us to a lot of judgment and assumptions. But remember, people like my mum were products of their time, of their society. She was brought up when smoking was the social norm. Her doctor even encouraged her to smoke during pregnancy because the baby would be smaller and the birth would be easier. No wonder I ended up a journalist, right? Well, thank you, Big Tobacco. There you go. Now, you'll see many patients like my mum during your residencies and later in your practices and whatever work you do in healthcare. Sometimes we refer to these patients dismissively as frequent flyers. Try to remember that those frail, sick people sitting on your exam table had full, rich lives. Not always the best choices, but they did a lot of good things. Try as best you can to contextualize their illnesses. Now, the term patient-centered care gets bandied around a lot these days. But what does it really mean on the front line? The U.S. Institute of Medicine defines patient-centered care as, quote, care that is respectful and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs, and values. That's nice and it's inspiring, but it's also pretty vague. You've probably heard the expression, I don't know anything about art, but I know what I like. Well, patient-centered care is a bit like that. You know it when you experience it. And you really know it when you don't experience it. The best definition I've ever heard of patient-centered care is the simplest: giving a patient a better day. That's what my mum always hoped for. When all is said and done, that's what healthcare is all about. It's not about performing miracles, but it's about making patients feel a little bit better. Now, I don't want to downplay or dismiss your knowledge or your abilities, but simply remind you of the limitations of medicine. What really makes and keeps people healthy is their socioeconomic environment, their choices, their income, their education, a roof over their head, access to decent food, a sense of belonging. Medicine is there to patch things up when people are broken, but let's try and keep them from being broken in the first place. Now, one of the greatest privileges in our society is to have the letters MD after your name. Many of you here are going to have that today. Those two letters confer great power. And with great power comes great responsibility, if I can quote Voltaire, or Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. Sometimes you'll literally hold a patient's life in your hands, but most of the time, you'll have the power to make them feel just a little bit better. Both of those things matter. Use your voice to do good, not only for individual patients, but for society. If there's one lesson I learned from my mum, time and time again, is that it's the little things that have the greatest impact. Hello, my name is Jane. How can I help you? Nothing mattered more to my mum, or to any patient for that matter, than a simple introduction and a simple question. In fact, I should correct that statement. There's one thing that did matter more. If the doctor or other healthcare provider asking that question actually listened for an answer. I want to read you a tweet from a physician that eloquently expresses this concept better than I can. And this is a quote. "I had the chance to really talk with a patient today. And when I say talk, I mean listen. And when I say patient, I mean person." That's an all too rare occurrence these days, to be able to do that. Modern medicine has become so specialized that many physicians treat specific syndromes and body parts, and the patient herself gets lost in the process. In our unrelenting quest for efficiency and measurement, we often lose sight of the person. We've filled our temples of medicine with such bedazzling high-tech tools that we've forgotten that we should treat people where they live. In our desire to cure, we tend to overtreat. We see death as a failure, not as a natural evolution of life. Now, I don't want to cast a pall over today's celebration by talking too much about death. Maybe I already have. But indulge me a little bit more, because like me, I think you can learn a lot about living from the actions of the dying. As I said earlier, I speak to many people when they're sick or dying. I've even been at the bedside when they take their last breath, and it's marvelous. Now, that may strike you as morose or odd, but I'm using the word marvelous here in its true sense, meaning eye-opening and wondrous. When people are sick, when they know there's no cure, even when they're dying, what they care about is quality of life. They're not resigned, they're realistic. They don't expect a miracle, but they want and deserve acceptance. In short, more than anything else, people want respect, especially from their healthcare providers. We hear a lot these days about personalized medicine, about drugs and treatments that can be tailored to specific genomic and epigenetic markers. That's exciting stuff. But what people really long for is not personalized medicine, but a personal touch. They crave a human connection. Not just care, but caring, a sense of belonging and mattering. As a journalist, my job is ostensibly to write, to report, to summarize, to analyze, to inform. But my real job is actually to listen. Listening is a skill that will serve you all very well in healthcare, regardless of the program you've graduated from, but especially in medicine. Listening is an art, and listeners are an endangered species. Listening well is more complex than it appears. It requires us to set aside our assumptions and our prejudices. Above all, listening requires us to be quiet, to embrace silence. That's not easy in our fast-paced world. It's not easy when we're anxious to get up here and get our degree. But, like accomplished musicians, we need to recognize that the silence between the notes is as important as the notes themselves. Listening is as important, if not more important, than talking. My mum was a woman of few words. But she would let her family and her healthcare providers know what she liked and what she didn't like, especially if they were willing to listen. What she hated the most was the blue hospital gown. To her, it was a cloak of invisibility, a symbol of powerlessness. You can change that. My mum also balked at all the academic banter about privacy. She didn't care much about which health professional saw her medical records. To be honest, they weren't that interesting. To her, the privacy issue that really mattered was that she was too often left in the hallway of the emergency department for hours, with, in her words, my bony ass hanging out for everyone to see. That's what matters to patients. That's a real privacy issue. What she hated when she visited the doctor's office is when he stared fixedly at the computer screen. I once accompanied my mum to an appointment to her family physician, and after about 5 minutes of him asking her formulaic questions and tapping on a keyboard, I interrupted him and I asked, "What color are my mother's eyes?" For a few seconds, he was perplexed, but then he understood the gist of my question, and he turned beet red with an embarrassment, realizing that he had actually never looked her in the face. That's not good medicine. We hear a lot about personalized medicine, as I said, but what people want is personal medicine, hands-on. They crave a human connection. As you head into the world to forge long, successful, and prosperous careers, remember that the best medicine you can offer your patients is a listening ear. The best treatment you can offer them is a compassionate heart. You can do that every single day. It costs nothing. So I guess my take-home message is this. Try to treat every patient as you would treat your mom or your grandmother, with dignity and with respect and with caring. You leave here today with great knowledge. Now go out there and learn some wisdom from your patients. Thank you.